Bless me, Father, for I'm about to sin. Again, and again, and again. Father Jim, it's been a pleasure meeting your acquaintance. We're going to see to it that all help from the police department gets cut off for this church because of you. No, all kidding aside. Father, thank you very much for the hospitality, but I want you to know there's only a few things John and I had in common. He was so much better than I was at everything, but we agreed on one thing. Satchel Paige got it right about age. When Satchel Paige pitched his win against the against the Cubs, and on his 47th birthday, he didn't get to the majors till after Jackie Robinson had made it. Probably the greatest pitcher in history of baseball, still having an arm at 47. And Gov, he pitched a win on his 47th birthday, and the press went into the locker room and said, "Amazing, 47 pitching a win. How do you feel about being 47, Satch?" He looked at me and said, "I don't look at age that way, boys." He said, "How do you look at it?" He said, "Look at it this way. How old would you be if you didn't know how old you was? I'm 42. John was 50. So I want to get it straight, okay?" I told you I was going to sin, but Governor Whitmer, Madam Speaker, who's not here, but she told me why she wasn't going to be here. She ran into an ice storm. And all the members of Congress who will be at the memorial service in Washington, D.C. wanted to be here. But Mayor, thank you for the passport into Dearborn. And Mayor Duggan, thank you for allowing me to land in Detroit. And but look, folks, we have a lot of folks here that knew John and loved John, and I see the delegation from, hey Joe, how are you? Indiana's here, but the Levins are here, and congresswomen, congressmen, and a few from out of state that got here like we did last night, I guess, before the ice blocked us all in. You know, and all the staff of John, past and present staff. You had a great honor of working for a master, and I'm sure taught you a lot, and I'm sure you taught him a lot as well. Thank you for being here. And Judge, you, as I said when I met you earlier, you couldn't deny him. You look just like your dad, and you seem to have all his qualities. I really mean that sincerely. It's been an honor getting to meet you, and also to meet your nephew, who's if he should know that his grandpop is embracing his mom right now in heaven, and there's a reunion going on, and they're happy for it. But most of all, Debbie, it's beyond my capacity to do justice to John Dingell. I've served with an awful lot of members of Congress and the United States Senate. As a matter of fact, when I left after being elected my 7th term as the United States Senator to be sworn in as Vice President, the Senate historian came in and did what they call a history minute. They'd come into the caucuses and tell us something happened on that day in history. And he was saying, as Senator Biden's leaving to go, there's only been, I think at the time, 13 members have served longer than I had in the United States Senate, which made me very upset. But I met a lot of great women and great men, and there's only a few that I looked up to. I admired almost everyone I worked with, but a few that I looked up to, that I knew were better than I was at what they did. I knew they were more successful at what they set out to do than I was. And John Dingell was that man. And when John, as Debbie will tell you, asked me whether I would be one of his eulogists, I was flattered. But I know it's beyond my capacity to sum up a man, if I had 5 days, who, like John Dingell, to do justice to who he was. But he wanted us to celebrate today, celebrate his extraordinary life. And Debbie, I know from experience as well of losing John is like losing part of your soul. He was your soul. But what an amazing soul he was. You know, I think we, all of us, owe the Dingell family a lot for sharing John with us in his retirement, as well as when he was holding public office. You know, there's an anecdote that John would sometimes tell about Franklin Roosevelt. When Roosevelt died, the funeral train carrying the president's body from Washington to upstate New York the train tracks were crowded with thousands of people. And families turned out all along the route to pay their tribute. And John loved to tell the story he'd heard about an African-American man standing alongside the track, tears streaming down his face. And a neighbor asked this man, "Why are you crying? You didn't know Roosevelt." And the man replied, "No, but he knew me. No, but he knew me." A little bit like your story of a woman who came up to you, Father. She knew John, and she knew, though, John knew her. All across the country today, Americans are celebrating the life of John Dingell, not because they knew John, but because they knew John knew them. I remember talking with my son when I introduced him to John some years ago, and my granddaughter, who was a second-year student at Columbia Law School, was in the room with us. And after we walked out, she looked at me and said, "Pop, why do you like him so much?" And she was impressed with him, but she could tell I really liked him. Why did I like him so much? I think it's because I knew he knew me. And he gave me confidence. He gave me confidence. He made me believe more in myself than I had. John had that special capacity to do so. Because when you were with him, you knew you were with greatness. You knew you were the man who, in just 2 years of his whole career, did more than most people do in their entire career. But I told my granddaughter that what I liked about John had nothing to do with the fights that we were in together and won together. I can sum it up in one word, why I cared so much for John Dingell. Like my father, he believed everyone, without exception, was entitled to be treated with dignity. Dignity was how John walked. Dignity was how John talked. Dignity was how John carried himself. But more than that, it was how he treated everyone. And I mean everyone. John knew the people of Michigan and the people of America because he knew the meaning of the word dignity. Everything he worked on was rooted in that knowledge, in the belief that every single solitary person wanted and deserved to be treated with dignity, wanted to be recognized, no matter who they were, just recognized for their worth, the job they did. So when John worked on bills to create jobs, he understood that a job was really about a lot more than a job, a lot more than a paycheck. My dad, when we moved from Scranton because there was no work in the 50s, every time someone would lose their job in our family or there ever a recession, it'd be an uncle or an aunt or someone in the neighborhood would be laid off. My dad, John, would look at me and say, "Joe, remember, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community." Then he'd always end by saying, "It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, 'Honey, it's going to be okay,' and meaning it." John fought like hell for every woman or man to be able to look at their kid in the eye and say, "Honey, it's going to be okay." It's about their sense of self. It's about their place in the community. And people knew that. Whether you use those words or not, people knew that about John. They knew it. You know, like me, John came from an auto state. We had, none of you believe it except Carl Levin, because you heard me say it so many times. We had the second highest percentage of auto workers in the United States of America when I got elected in 1972 after Michigan. We have none left, none at all left. But John stood up for folks who defined themselves and found their identity in their jobs. John reintroduced his dad's universal health care bill at the beginning of every single Congress that he served in. He understood that health care was, again, more than about keeping you healthy. It was about peace of mind, about people going to bed at night staring at the ceiling and wondering, my God, if I get sick, what happens? We lose everything. We lose everything. I know my dad stared at the ceiling. Most of your dads did too, and moms. John got it. John got it to the core. He understood about the dignity that comes from having peace of mind. Knowing that your family is going to be okay no matter what happens to you. You know, John not only fought for Medicare, he is Medicare, for God's sake. Because he knew that it would bring dignity to the millions and millions of proud people who worked their whole lives before it came along, worked their whole lives. And as they got older, lost a spouse, we're looking at the ignominy of being in poor health and not knowing who to ask. That's what drove John. It wasn't a mathematical calculation. It was about the people he knew and he loved, who he knew grew old in fear, worried that they'd be impoverished to become a burden to their children. All of my friends here are elected officials. They know how many times people come up to you and say, I don't want to be a burden to my kids. I don't want them to have to suffer for me. They knew that's what John was about. And John fought like hell to allow a kid that's qualified to get to college or post-high school education. He didn't just think about, well, a beautiful mind is a terrible thing to waste, as the saying goes. John knew that that father and mother, there's nothing worse as a parent than looking at your child and knowing you can't help with a problem and or an opportunity. And the sense of shame you feel that you can't do it. John fought like hell, not just for that child, but for the dignity. The dignity of that parent. He knew it doesn't matter whether you're a child of a congressman or a child of a bricklayer or a child of a single mom living on assistance. Everyone deserves an opportunity. He also knew the institutional barriers that are built up. Some are seen and some are unseen. But there's barriers built up, providing kids who have great potential, little opportunity to take advantage of. Everyone deserves an opportunity to go as far as his willingness to work, his God-given ability. But with John, it was about being given a chance. Given a chance. As a die-hard man of Michigan, he sang "Hail to the Victors" many times. He also was the only one who knew that I played at the University of Delaware, that we stole Michigan's uniform. I told him, God forgive me. Our coach, who was a Hall of Fame coach named Nelson, played halfback at Michigan, came to Delaware as a coach, and copied their helmets exactly, the same helmets. John did not like that. But his life, his work wasn't about hailing the victors. It was about focusing on those who suffered and offering them a hand, and building a nation that hails the humanity and dignity of all our people. My dad used to have an expression. He'd say, "Champ, I don't expect the government to solve my problems, but damn, I expect them to understand my problems. I know they can't solve them all, just they understand the problems." If we had time, which we clearly don't, I'd ask all John's former staff members, how many people did you run in taking care of casework for John who didn't think John understood their problem? And that makes a gigantic difference. Just letting people know we know what they're facing, even if we can't fix it. From my perspective, John never liked to leave anybody alone. You know, John understood. He always began with understanding, right to the core of people who served and the problems that touched their lives. The list of John's achievements is literally, not figuratively, like leading the list of America's proudest moments in the last 7 decades. Look behind our pages of history, and there he is. There he is. John's holding the gavel when Medicare passes in the House. I remember John and I standing next to President Obama. John sitting next to him, me standing to his right, when we signed the Affordable Care Act. John was here, the President was here, and I was here, and all he does is look up at me and go, "Almost there." What a guy, man, I tell you what. And he knew the difference between a hot mic and a cold mic. There's John in 1964, pushing members of the Rules Committee to advance the Civil Rights Act on the House floor. John. Around the same time, a friend of all of ours and a man who's going to speak next week or later in the week, was supposed to be here today, couldn't get here. A man who walked across the bridge in Selma, who really went out of his way. John Lewis was a young man working with. If John were here, my guess is John is famous for saying, "You are the light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen or dim or diminish your light." That was John. That was John. He said, choose confrontation hesitantly. But when it is your time, don't be afraid to stand up, speak out against great injustice. It's John. And damn, when he spoke out. Now, you all knew John never had a temper. John would never lose it or never lecture us. But my Lord, when he did. There he is in 1965, fighting to hammer and tong to pass Medicare. And then every single step of the way, he's done what all great pieces of legislation have done, improved it, expanded, and extended it. But you think, well, that's John worked on just health care. Well, our first water quality standards, it's because of John. He authored them. And then there's writing the Endangered Species Act. in 1973. I think my Republican friends thought they were the only endangered species when John was moving. That's a joke. That's a joke. You know, my dad used to say about the Irish Catholics. He said, be careful, Joey. When they make a little money and move to the suburbs, they think they're a damn Republican. You know, I worry about anyway, that's it. Okay. You know, his range was broad and inclusive. And there's John just 18 months ago, after a group of white supremacists and neo-Nazis literally climbing out of darkened fields carrying torches, chanting the same exact, most people don't know it, the same exact anti-Semitic bile that was chanted in the streets of Nuremberg and Berlin and throughout Germany in the 30s. Neo-Nazis, white supremacists, their crazed faces illuminated by torchlight. As a kid, come out of the civil rights movement, I never thought I'd see that again in a historic American city. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to respond to it and wrote an article in Atlantic Magazine, but John summed it up in one sentence. Here's what he said. He said, I signed up to fight the Nazis 73 years ago, and I'll do it again if I have to. Isn't that John? Folks, you all sent John back to Washington 30 different times. That's never happened before. You did it, I believe, without knowing for sure, because you knew, he knew who you were and what you needed. John was probably who my mother was talking about without ever met him. My mom used to have an expression. She says the Irish of it. She says, never bow, never bend, never kneel, never yield. She pounded it into all our kids' heads. Never, never bow, never bend, never yield. John never did when he thought he was right. John never, ever did. He's a man who knew where he came from, and he knew that public service wasn't a title you wear, but a shift that you work, like everybody else. His constituents, I think, loved him for it. They knew and respected him. And he showed that respect by every landmark that he built. When I think of John, I can't help but think about what a former Attorney General, former Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, said of Abraham Lincoln in the moments after Lincoln died. Quote, now he belongs to the ages. Now he belongs to the ages. How many people have served this country? Can that be said at and people nod their heads and not go, what are you talking about? He belongs to the ages. In life, John Dingell and his, as he said, lovely Deborah and his 4 children. But now he too belongs to the ages. Generations of Americans are going to study his work, know they're better off because he lived. And I remember a man who could always be found standing firm on the right side of history. And when he had to, stand alone. When John delivered his first speech in Congress when he was 29 years old or 8, I'm not sure. I thought it was 8, but someone told me it was 9 today. But he was too damn young to be in the Congress. I remember the first time I met him, Carl. It was the first State of the Union I attended. I walked up the floor and he put his hand out, shook me, and he said, congratulations, you won, but you're too damn young to be here. I was 29. And when I got elected. But when he delivered his first speech in Congress, he fought back the tears at the enormity of his duty in the memory of his dad's death. He was there to pick up the baton his father had laid down and carry it forward. And he told his colleagues, and I quote, "If I can be half the man my father was, I shall feel I was a great success." My dad had an expression. He said, "You know your success as a dad when you turn," this is a true story, "when you turn and look at your child and realize they turned out better than you." My sons turned out better than me, and John's dad's son turned out better. Look around all he's built, all he's touched, all he stood for. There isn't a person alive who couldn't say the same thing about the dean, because that's what he was. And it's our job now to pick up that baton he talked about in his first speech. He passed it forward and needs to be carried. We mourn today because we knew John. And we stand up straighter. We work harder. We'll face tomorrow with sharp minds and steel in our bones, with dignity and respect for all men and women, if we really want to do him any service at all. The famous quote in Hamlet, "He was a man. Take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again." You shall not look upon his like again. Hail to John. God bless you, old buddy. God bless you, Debbie, and all the Dingell family. And may God protect our troops.